converted man here. Nacromancer is wrong about his argument. Dead wrong. Can he resurrect it from the grave, or should it be left dead where it lay? What do you mean? That's Nacromancer. Oh, it's not necro. It's what the hell is a Nacromancer? Whatever. I'm gonna still make fun of the name. Anyways, he has an appeal to analogy, followed by more appeals to analogy, followed by some very poor reasoning, appeals to consequence, appeals to emotion, appeal to utility, and other logical fallacies in his argument. Not enough quotes in the universe. If you're wondering, when you looked at my description, what NEQIU stood for. Not enough quotes in the universe. Anyways, it's not an argument. It's not very good, and I'm going to expose it for being that. And so here we go, I guess. And, he says it's an atheistic argument for belief in God, which is not even a thing that you could do, because we don't believe in God as an atheist. So there would never be an atheistic argument for God unless there was evidence for God, at which case I wouldn't be an atheist. Anyways,
our beliefs are not just statements of information that we accept as truth. They are biological mechanisms of survival. We didn't evolve the psychological capacity to believe in things so that we could debate about philosophy or politics. We evolved this psychological function as a mechanism of survival to navigate the risks and rewards of life. Think of your beliefs more as a map or a navigation system rather than a collection of informational opinions. Imagine, for example, that you are lost in a desert. Of course, the location of a water source must be accurately represented on your map in order for you to survive. However, if you don't already have this information, the location of a water source remains a mystery. You are faced with a choice. Believe that there is water to be found somewhere, even in the absence of evidence, and begin to search. Or believe all is lost, give in to despair, roll over, and die of thirst.
Okay, as I said, we've got an argument to and from analogy. We have evidence that water exists. And I don't know how you got out into that desert in the first place and how you got lost so badly that you don't know where you are and that you didn't have a map. There's so many questions here. But regardless, you're somehow in a desert without a map. If there's vegetation around of any sort, if there's any plants, there's probably water in the ground. So you can dig for water. You can chop down the plants, try to get some water out of them. Might not get a lot, might get something. So there is water. We know that water exists. Therefore, it's reasonable to conclude that there will be water if you look for it. If you know what you're looking for, all the better. The more information that you have, the higher the chances of your survival. The more ignorant that you are, the least likely it is that you will survive. If you just go off in a random direction hoping that you'll find water, you might find it, but you might die as well. And the odds aren't in your favor. However, if you know something about survival, well, first of all, you wouldn't be lost in the desert, but whatever. You gain an advantage. So when you are less ignorant about reality, you have a better chance of survival. But he's going to ignore that.
First, choosing to believe you can find water, even if you don't yet have any evidence, may lead you nowhere and you may die anyway. But if there is a possibility of finding water, you must first choose to believe, or at least to hope, that it is out there somewhere. We have a word for that kind of belief in the absence of evidence. It's called faith. In other words,
Okay, so again, this argument to and from analogy. So I found a scenario where faith can be utilized in some positive way. And then I'm going to extrapolate that therefore faith can be used in other positive ways, and therefore it's fine to have faith. In this one scenario that you've constructed in full, your suggestion is faith is utilitarianly useful. Well, hope might compel you to move forward, but does it make it useful or beneficial? No, to some extent, yeah. But is it truly blind faith? Again, we know water exists. You do not know that you will find water, however, but you definitely know that if you don't look, you won't find it. That you know for sure. If you don't do anything, then you will not accomplish anything. So that is something you know without any faith required. If you dig, maybe you'll get water. Maybe not. You don't know. But if you don't try, well, you won't know if you succeed or fail. Having failed that, looking for plants or animals or anything else that signifies life is probably a good idea because there's probably going to be water around. And if nothing else, maybe you can get some water from the plants, vegetation, whatever that is. Maybe you can track the animal and see where they go to get a drink. So maybe not, but definitely not trying will again lead to a zero result. So this is all information that you have at your disposal that is all data pointing to the existence of water. And if you utilize that data, you can perhaps increase your odds of finding water. The hope that you will find water is irrelevant. You can maybe find water. And the effort to try to find water is a compelling force to get you to do it. You don't need to hope that you'll find water. You can just go try to find water. Being hopeful, again, is somewhat irrelevant. You don't need it to know that you could find it. And the more information you have, the better it is that you'll be able to find it. So again, less ignorance is better. But he's arguing the exact opposite.
In other words, you must have hope or faith in order to create the possibility of survival. We evolved to believe that we will always be able to find water, that we will always be able to find some solution to whatever challenges we face. This
Not exactly. We didn't evolve those traits as you've laid out. We evolved for to survive essentially, and we're adapted to do so. The imagination of humans is something that we evolved as well, and that gives us an advantage over other creatures. It allows us to plan ahead and imagine that somebody is over there and what tactic might be used to outsmart that other individual so that I can take from them what they possess. They're a tribe and they will wipe us out. We know that because we saw them wipe out a different tribe. So how are we going to defend ourselves? And so we can imagine a scenario where they will attack us and how to defend ourselves. That imagination may or may not turn out to be exactly what happens, but it allows us to prepare nonetheless. So this same imagination that we have can be utilized to imagine that we will succeed in our hunt for water. And it may fail us because imagination on its own is not adequate. Information is. Data is king. The more you know, the more likely it is that you will survive such a scenario. The more hope that you have, doesn't add to your survival ability at all. The more faith that you have doesn't matter one bit in terms of your survivability. However, faith, if we have indeed evolved to be able to have faith, and I suppose to some degree we have, might serve some utilitarian function for primitives, but once you are advanced enough, you no longer need it, which means you're just using a vestige thing of evolution that's no longer necessary to utilize because you have something far superior to faith called intellect. But what would you know about that?
This is, in fact, a biologically necessary bias for any organism to improve its chances of survival. It does not mean such a belief will always be accurate. Often it's not, and the organism fails to find a solution and dies. You might say hope is a better word than faith, but hope still leaves you with a finite source of determination and persistence. Because
if you have an adequate word for it, then you don't need faith. So if hope is adequate, then that's all you need. But you don't want that to be the conclusion, so you're going to ignore it. Okay.
hope contains a sliver of truth, the possibility that no solution, no proverbial water source exists within reach. So while hope might be preferable to despair for the purposes of survival, it's not nearly as powerful as faith. Hope.
How do you know that? Like, what measurement system did you use to determine that?
Can be destroyed. When you're faced with an overwhelming amount of evidence that there is no solution, the only logical conclusion is to abandon hope and give in to despair. Faith.
Well, no, because that would be a belief that you've formed without all available data, just the data that you have at hand. But to assume that the data that you have at hand is all the available data is to make a belief assumption about reality that is not necessarily warranted. And you picture a person in a dark room drinking alcohol as your, clip that you found provided. Well, first of all, turn on a light. That will make you feel a little bit better. Stop drinking alcohol. That will help. Get up, get outside, and interact with some humans. Even if it's just going to the library to get a book or something, interacting with other humans will make you feel a little bit better. Also, get something to eat. That will make you feel a little bit better as well. Call a suicide help hotline. Get information from other humans because the data that you have is necessarily going to be limited. To assume that you have all the data is rather ignorant. So it would be a belief to assume that you have all the data and then give up. You don't have all the data. You don't know that you have all the data. So ask other people for more data. Try to get other information, other things. Hey, look, my XYZ, all these things, I'm out of money. I'm no friends, all no family left. It's just me. I'm a single person, and I don't see a reason to keep going. Okay, well, but there are reasons to keep going. First of all, you don't know what's going to happen next. You don't know, well, you're encountering a person now, so that's something. Maybe we could be friends. Why don't we try that? See how that works. Why don't you attempt to get a place to live or a job or whatever? Why don't you try to get into a homeless shelter? Why don't you do X, Y, and Z rather than assuming that your conclusion is correct? Because that is ignorance compelling you to that conclusion, not data. So your beliefs can lead you to end your existence because your beliefs were not based on actual reason and logic, which is the scenario you're describing is somebody has assumed they have all the data, so they give up. Well, that is the wrong assumption to make. They don't have all the available data. Therefore, their conclusion is flawed. Logically speaking, being faithful could lead you to end your life. Plus, by the way, if there's an afterlife, if you believe in an afterlife so strongly, wouldn't that also lead to your death? I mean, so what? He's drinking alcohol in a dark room and slowly killing himself. In fact, he should do it faster because the next life is going to be so much better than this life. Why worry? Why worry about some despair that you have now? You're going to get a better life in the next round. So again, faith can lead you to your own execution if your faith is placed in an idea that is apparently and evidentially not true. Or if it is true, you don't have the data on it to confirm its truth. So maybe there's an afterlife, maybe it's better, but you don't know that, and you can't know that. So why believe it? You see, the problem with faith doesn't work because facts actually do work, whereas faith can only ever lead you to more faith.
Faith has a kind of stubborn refusal to accept any evidence or any argument, no matter how compelling. Faith looks in the face of logical despair and says, no, fuck you. I don't care.
Well, I'll agree that faith will flip off logic. Faith doesn't care about facts. It doesn't care about the data. It only cares about the feeling. Faith is completely illogical in that sense. Faith is believing despite the and opposed to any evidence to the contrary. And that is quite powerful. And that's what it makes it so dangerous. Because I believe X, well, that's nice, but that doesn't make X true. The people that hijacked planes back in the day that we will never forget certainly believe that doing so will lead them to paradise. Well, I don't think that it did, but they certainly believed that it did, and they ended their own lives and the lives of others because of that belief. But sure, other times faith can be useful, so ignore the times when faith turns out to be bad, right? Or maybe not. Maybe we should say, hey, look, there are many times when faith turns out to be a very, very bad thing.
If despair is the logical conclusion. Where there's a will, there's a way. And I will keep fighting and keep trying and keep searching until I find it. But this kind of faith, by its illogical approach, doesn't guarantee success. It doesn't magically manifest a water source or a solution to your problems where none exists. It only increases the chances of finding a solution when it's very difficult to find. That's why.
No, as I said, you've conflated faith with hope and actually having evidence that something is real. We know that water exists in your scenario. And again, the more data and information I have about how to locate water, the higher the chances are that I'm going to find water. So pit me against somebody that has pure faith. Pit a survivalist against me. Who will be more likely to survive? The survivalist. She knows more information about how to survive than I do. And my limited knowledge of how or where to find water, I might indeed perish or suffer because I don't know as much as the survivalist. But me compared to the person that just has faith that they'll find water but don't know where or how to look, I think that my chances of survival are higher than theirs because I'm using reason and logic to try to locate water, where they're just going like, maybe it's over this way. Hey, God, which way is the water? Oh, that way? I'll go that way. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, okay. And you're going to keep going that way, even though the evidence points you to a different way because you have faith that you're right. Whereas, hey, look, I've got evidence that water might be this way. I'm going to go that way. And, we'll see who actually survives. Anyways.
Why it evolved. Not because it's always right, but because it is always the best way to stack the odds in your favor and increase the chances of your survival. We call this hope against hope. So, from a purely evolutionary perspective, let's assume that there really is no God. Let's assume that the stubborn, illogical choice to have faith in the face of overwhelming evidence to the contrary is nothing more than a survival mechanism. Any individual belief itself may or may not be factually accurate. When it's a belief about something for which there is no clear evidence, it becomes a defiant, irrational response to choose to believe. And yet,
correct. You actually got that right. But it's more nuanced and complex than what you're saying. Because faith isn't necessarily something that you just automatically have. It's something learned and given to you. Specific religions are taught to you usually when you're young. Not always, but usually. And or the zeitgeist, that is the society around you, is that there are many religious people around you or that you're exposed to that. And so when you see this as being normal, then you're more likely to conform. In fact, I just saw something, and I'd have to look it up again, but there was a quick little short on this where they showed a bunch of motorcycle helmets in an elevator, about 4 of them. 3 people, there's a person came in the elevator, stood there, and then 3 other people came in, they all put on the helmets. And the 4th person eventually puts on the helmet. Even though they have no idea why they're doing that, they do it. Why? Because we are social species. We will conform with what everyone else is doing. There's a very powerful essay that you should read if you haven't already done so. And maybe if you have done so but haven't read it lately, it's worth a reread, called Salvation by Langston Hughes. I'll spoil the essay in brief, in that Langston was primed to experience Jesus coming for him. His grandmother was certain that Jesus was going to manifest itself in a very certain way for Langston. He went to church during the revival. They were praying, they were singing, and he was waiting for Jesus to arrive. Now, other kids went forward before him until it was just him and this other kid. And he sat there and they sang and they prayed and they sang and they prayed. And he's probably not very comfortable in this moment because there's an expectation of him to go forward because Jesus has come for him. The guy next to him says, the heck with it, he swears or whatever, and goes forward anyways. And Langston realizes that guy survived, even though he clearly is lying about Jesus coming for him. And now they're happy. Well, eventually Langston goes forward to accept Jesus. But that night he cries. Now his grandmother interprets this as him finding Jesus, but in reality, it's him believing that Jesus never came for him. So he's not saved. And he never will be saved because God didn't show up for him. It's a reasonable conclusion to make given the information that he received. Now, one way to look at that essay is to say, well, his grandmother was in the wrong for telling him to expect Jesus to do X, Y, and Z. How do we know how God was going to reveal itself to him? But why didn't God reveal itself to Langston Hughes? It seems rather odd. He wanted God to reveal himself. His grandmother wanted God to reveal itself. He expected God and desired it. He didn't want to lie about it, and yet Jesus never came for him. That's quite odd. So did just Jesus not like him? Is that the conclusion to make? I don't know. I think that Jesus didn't come for him because Jesus doesn't come for anybody. But what does happen is you feel like Jesus is coming for you because you've been told that Jesus will come for you. So your imagination takes over and makes you feel like that's true, even though it's not true. And now that belief has been established, and you have spent time and energy on that belief because you went forward. You've now performed a public action which increases your brain thinking this is true. And then every Sunday you go and you do more energy spending on this belief, and it gets deeper and deeper. So the belief that people form is because religion gears itself around forming this belief. Now, take a look at Scientology. We know now, thankfully, thanks to South Park and others, that we know the beliefs of Scientology that are locked up hidden in the upper echelons that you're not supposed to know as a peon entering Scientology. We know that they believe in Zeno, that put an atom bomb in a volcano and all this other nonsense. That you just, how would anyone ever believe that? Well, because you're not told that at first. It's only when you get to a certain level that you're told that. So the person going in, hey, come on in, check out our literature. And you're like, I guess, what do I have to lose? And you get their little book and you read it. And now you've spent time reading. And they go, well, you can get one for $12. That's all. How about $2? Okay. I mean, it's only $2. But now you have spent money on something. So you didn't just waste your money, because that's not how your brain works. Your brain's going to say, I bought this and it must mean something. And then the more money you spend, the more you think that the thing is something of value. The more energy you pour into the belief, the more you think the belief is true. The more energy and time that you spend on that belief, the more you reinforce it. So that's how Scientology works to convince you, and that's how many religions work to convince you. It's a slow process over time. They indoctrinate you, and you don't even realize that you're being indoctrinated, and in fact, you're a willing participant of it. Of course, if you ask questions and you buck the system, well, they'll ask you to leave because we can't have that. So a skeptic wouldn't survive the indoctrination process because there's no evidence for these things. There's just faith. And when all you have is faith, you don't know that you will make it to the end. You believe, but you cannot know. Faith is not a way to get to the truth. It is only the way to increase your own belief about your belief. But being skeptical means we ask questions about that belief. Say, is this true? And how can I know if it's true or not? Because I'm not going to assume that it's true. I'm going to explore if it's true. That's what I did when I was a Christian. See, people were always asking me questions about, Christianity, and I was like, oh, these pesky atheists always asking me all these darn questions, and they just keep asking for evidence. Of course we have the evidence, right? I mean, we do have the evidence, but nobody wanted to give them the evidence. I thought that was rather odd. Why is it the Christians they're just giving arguments all the time? Arguments, come on, don't we have evidence? So since nobody else wanted to do it, I thought I would do it myself. And I went looking for the evidence. Well, I'm a skeptic now. Why? Well, I didn't find the evidence. I found evidence to the contrary. And rather than ignoring that fact, I accepted that that was the true fact about reality. Of course, also learning informal logic helped me a lot too, because that exposed how bad these arguments are for this system that I believed in. But not only that, my skeptical thinking, once I acquired it, allowed me to examine other religions and see they also have flaws, similar, if not identical flaws. And faith itself now, as this guy is exploring in this analogy, he's trying to make it utilitarianly useful to use, where I'm exposing how, no, it can be used in negative ways as well. And ignoring that is not skeptical. And the fact of the matter is, the more you know, the less likely it is that you will die. Whereas the less you know, the more likely it is that you will die. But of course, if you believe, in an afterlife, who cares about death, right? So there, again, is another negative feature of faith, potentially. If you only care about your afterlife, what are you doing here? Go to your afterlife. Why do you need to be here? What could you possibly learn or do here that you couldn't do there? Well, maybe you can convince an atheist that there's a God so that they too will go with you when you all perish. Well, but the only way to do that would be to present them with evidence, which you don't have. So you're wasting your time trying to convince atheists unless you have evidence, which you don't have. So the only thing you can give an atheist is bad arguments like this guy is doing, and that won't convince us, but at least we can make fun of them and point out the fallacies that they've made and point out just how bad faith really is. Even though that should be apparent and obvious, but I guess it's not.
It's strategically superior because it facilitates the possibility of uncovering an unlikely solution. It's the same attitude that has resulted in most of the technological advancement of our civilization. The classic example is the Ford V8 engine. The most intelligent and sensible engineers of the 1930s believed that it was mechanically impossible to create an 8-cylinder engine in a single engine block. Based on the available evidence, information, and understanding, everyone who approached the question with logic concluded that it couldn't be done. And yet Henry Ford chose to be defiant and illogical and ignored the conclusions of all the experts who understood the topic best. And lo and behold, he was right.
This is a strange analogy story. I don't know if it's true or not regarding Ford. I mean, he made manufacturing a thing, but I don't know if he did what you're claiming. But again, it's I am going to try to do X. And it turns out X is possible to do, even though other people didn't think that X was possible to do. Well, you don't know that X is possible to do or not do, like if that's what you're going for. So we're going to try. Okay. And what if Ford had failed and failed again and again and again and again until the end of his life? And in fact, everybody that attempted to do this failed. Well, eventually people would say, you know what, maybe we can't do this because everybody has failed. But maybe everybody's tried the wrong way. And I don't know how many people need to keep failing before we decide it's not a good idea to keep trying. But at some point, we're going to say, you know what, we've tried everything that we can think of. And, well, I mean, somebody somewhere is going to try something new. Good luck with that. If it is possible to do it, then we can do it. So we made 4 cylinders. Why can't we do 6? Well, because people think that we can't. Okay, did they try? Well, no, they just said that we can't. That's a belief that they hold, not evidence. They don't actually have an argument. They only have beliefs. So I'm going to base my conclusion on their beliefs? No. Because I reject what they say because they don't actually have evidence, and I'm going to go and try to explore other techniques, other ways of doing what we've already done and just extending it outwards. That's not faith, that's innovation. But, you know, whatever equivocation you need to make for your analogy to function, I guess you'll make it because that's all you've got is analogy and story rather than facts and data.
His defiant insistence that a solution did exist, he and his team discovered that a solution did in fact exist. Not only did they revolutionize the industry and our understanding of mechanics, they revolutionized our entire approach to innovation. It wasn't logical, it didn't make sense to believe it, but he defiantly chose to believe it anyway. And that defiant belief shaped our entire civilization. Our technology has advanced so exponentially precisely because we have come to approach innovation with an assumption that a solution can always be found.
I'm not really sure that that's a warranted conclusion. But even if it was, this is an extrapolation based on data that we have. Other people before us have been able to advance technology because of their understanding of technology or science or what have you. So it's a reasonable extrapolation to make. That doesn't sound like faith to me. That sounds like an informed opinion that, hey, we made the thing smaller. Maybe we can make it smaller still. Now, it turns out for microchips that you can only make them so small because then you have the atoms bouncing against each other too much, and you can't do zeros and one when they're doing that. But they found another way with quantum computing where that doesn't really necessarily matter anymore because we can use the fact that they're doing that to make another state of a thing, and and then you've got quantum computers now, which we didn't make it smaller, but we found a way around it being small where the smallness doesn't matter, and we can increase the computing power despite or because of the smallness of it. So it's still true that we can't make it smaller because there's a limit on reality, but you can find a way to increase the computer power without having to make the microchips smaller, which you can't do because atoms and stuff. So there was another way to get around the problem and continue the progress. But will there be an inevitable point where we can't go greater than X? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. It depends. At some point, you'll have so much information ability in the computer that there's no reason to add more, or if you add more, it gets silly or ridiculous or whatever. Maybe, I don't know. There's some limit, maybe, but maybe not. And unless you try, you won't find out. But you are trying not because of faith, but because other people have tried and they've succeeded. Now, that doesn't mean you will succeed, and you definitely won't succeed if you don't know anything. Go ahead. Try to do programming without any knowledge of how to program. See if you can successfully create a video game. No, you won't. You won't even create a program. Why? Because you don't know how to do it. So you need to know stuff. You need to have information, which means you need to educate yourself. You need to read books and study and learn facts about reality. Well, you just have a belief in computer programming. You don't know that computer programming really results in computer programs. What kind of nonsense would that statement be? I mean, nobody would make that. Oh, wait, somebody made that statement, sort of. Let's see, what was it? Where was it? Here we go. So you have faith in science. You just put faith in something else. This is a tu que, a you as well argument. No, I don't have any faith in science because I have facts that science works. I don't need faith in it. Similar way, I don't need to know how to do a computer program to have fact that the computer program will result in a functioning program, because people have made computer programs and they know how to program. And I've seen computer language, even if I don't understand it. So there's no faith required to know that something will work, given that it's worked in the past, and it's worked in the past, and it's worked in the past, and it's worked in the past. Same thing for innovation. It's worked in the past, therefore, it's probably going to work again. More so if I use a system, a methodology that has been known to function like science, as opposed to a system that has no system and is unknown to work at all, like faith. In fact, faith can and will lead you to the wrong conclusion about reality, such as denial of biological evolution, not because you understand science, but because you don't want to understand science, because you believe that if evolution is true, then God isn't true. You believe that, but you don't know that. If God is true, then it is a God that used biological evolution. And if you say that God can only be true if biological evolution is false, that God cannot be true anymore. You might as well say that 1 + 1 is a billion, therefore God. Well, no, 1 + 1 is not a billion, and that God must be false. Any God tied to a false idea must be false. So if your God requires you to deny biological evolution or any other scientific fact, your God is false and can never be real under any condition ever. Deal with it. Live with it. That's the truth. You might not like it, but that's the way it is. Back to this video.
We've innovated so much that it's become illogical to assume that the technological limitations we have today will never be surpassed. Our faith in our ability to innovate has been vindicated, and now we innovate with confidence that advancements in every field are always possible. When you're dealing with the unknown, the defiant, irrational, illogical choice to believe in a possible solution, a possible positive outcome, is strategically superior to the choice to believe in the limitations of the currently available evidence, because we rarely, if ever, have access to all the evidence, the whole picture, to be able to accurately predict exactly what's possible.
Well, yes, that's kind of correct. We don't have all the information. So we shouldn't make a conclusion assuming that we have all the information, which is exactly what you're saying. You're saying that faith fits there when it doesn't really. I have information available to me. I don't have all the information, but I have a lot of information. Now, I don't know what 1,000,000 times 9,552 is. I have no idea. Now, I could look it up, but I don't know the answer. But I do know what the answer is not. The answer is not 0. It's not a negative number. It's not a percentage. It's not a fraction. It's it's going to be a big number. I know that for sure. So there's things that I can know about it without needing to know all the information. And I think that people often overlook this fact. You don't need to know everything to know what the answer is not. The answer is not and never will be goblins, ogres, and dragons. Such things are imaginary. And people don't care. Who cares if goblins, ogres, and dragons don't exist? Who cares? Nobody cares. I mean, maybe there's some schmuck out there that believes in goblins, ogres, and dragons. But, they're, one in a million people, whatever. Who cares? But people certainly do care when you say there's no God, because people have grown attached to the idea of God. They haven't grown attached to goblins, ogres, and dragons, broadly speaking. So questioning if there is or isn't a God is absolutely necessary and vital. Questioning if there is spiritual is absolutely vital. Questioning everything is absolutely vital. The question is, are you questioning what you believe, or are you just holding it because you're used to it? And if you're just holding it because you're used to it, why aren't you questioning? What's going on? Why aren't you being skeptical? In fact, you're applying your skepticism selectively if you're doing that. If you're suggesting everyone has faith, no, not everybody does have faith. I don't have faith and stuff. Not in that sense. I don't need to have faith, and I reject faith. But even if it was the case that you could somehow prove that everybody has faith, that doesn't make faith a good thing. This guy is trying to argue that faith can be good, and I'm saying no. Faith is oftentimes, more often than not, bad, and will lead you inevitably to conclusions that aren't true. Or if they are true, there'd be no way to verify them because you don't have any methodology. When you just have faith, you can believe anything. You don't have to have facts. The facts don't matter. Who cares? But when you have facts, you don't need faith anymore because you have reality already at your disposal. This is a lobster. Well, it's a stuffed lobster that I put on my head. That's the fact of reality. Now, if I claim that it's God, this is God, well, that's a weird claim to make. But I named him God, so technically this is God. But it's not the sort of God that people believe in. Unless they've read The Lobsterist, then I guess they do. Actually, no, The Lobsterist wouldn't be this particular God. It would be a different version of the deity, but whatever. That's technically whatever. Where was I? Oh, right. This video is wrong about everything. Let's get back to it.
We've been learning about reality for thousands of years and building a scientific explanatory model for the universe. And yet we are still but a speck in the galaxy with very limited tools and very short lifespans. As any real expert in any field will tell you, we might know a lot, but we don't know a whole lot more. Claiming to have enough knowledge to have any level of certainty or even a reasonable degree of confidence that we can reach a logical conclusion about the nature of reality is just as arrogant and stupid as an ancient hunter-gatherer claiming that it's impossible to build a machine that can fly. So
we do have enough information to make certain conclusions be warranted, but we don't have all the information, but we do know a lot. But basically, you're arguing for skepticism, not faith. You should be a skeptic because we don't know everything, not despite that we know everything. You're appealing to ignorance to say we should believe harder because of our ignorance, where I say I see the ignorance and say we should doubt more because we are ignorant. We should be skeptical because we are ignorant, which is different than doubt, but whatever. We should question things more and search for the data rather than just assert things blindly like, hey, faith, everyone has faith. Well, you don't know that. Have you tested that? Have you explored that? How would you prove that? What methodology would you use to do that? Can't trust science, can't do this, can't do that. Why? Because your faith? But your faith doesn't lead us to any testable conclusion, does it? So he's actually arguing for skepticism, not faith. But he doesn't know that because he's a spiritual Nimrod, I guess. Also, he doesn't have an argument. Notice, by the way, that there is no syllogism here, so it's not valid and therefore cannot be sound. And if his style is an essay format, he has also failed to support his starting thesis with any supporting data on the matter. He is only appealing to emotion and consequence and an analogy, nothing more. He's doing nothing but illogic to get to his conclusion.
When it comes to the unknown, the mysterious and unknowable nature of our vast reality, the choice to evaluate the available evidence and hazard a logical conclusion is very clearly illogical.
What? So I'm evaluating the evidence that I have at hand. Okay. That's the only thing I can do. So my conclusion is based on the evidence that I have, or rather evidence I don't have, that God doesn't exist. You're against that idea, presumably. You're suggesting that there's evidence out there, but I don't know about it. That might be the case. But until I have that evidence, there's no reason to think that there is evidence. So I still cannot believe. I can't just decide to believe because it might be a thing. No, I need a better argument. In fact, I need a sound argument, which you don't have. Your only argument seems to be that there's a utility in belief. And even if I was to grant that, which tentatively speaking on some levels in some degree, I guess I would, but only in certain circumstances, that still doesn't make it a way to get to know what is real. If you're blindly believing in something, you can never know that that's true. And so why believe in it then? Which is exactly why I don't believe in God. I don't have the evidence for it. Now, it could be the case that there is evidence out there, and I'm unaware of that evidence, and I accept that. But I will not believe until I find or am presented with said evidence. Just because it might be out there is not a compelling enough reason for me to think that it is out there. See Russell's Teapot for more.
It's like looking at a lake without any fish and claiming that it's therefore logical to conclude that no fish exist anywhere.
Okay, so this is kind of the black swan fallacy. He's saying, and he's using it wrong. So looking at water and saying that there's no fish anywhere because you didn't find fish in that water. Well, again, we know what fish are. We know that fish exist. So this would not be a coherent conclusion to make because the black swan fallacy. But that's not what atheists are doing, and you're lying when you say that. Let me back up a bit because I think some of that got phased out, so I want to make sure we all hear it.
To the unknown, the mysterious and unknowable nature of our vast reality, the choice to evaluate the available evidence and hazard a logical conclusion is very clearly illogical. It's like looking at a lake without any fish and claiming that it's therefore logical to conclude that no fish exist anywhere. You're looking at a tiny sliver of evidence and assuming that it gives you enough to work with. Enough.
Okay, in that scenario, we know that fish exist, so that certainly is a bad analogy. We don't know that life besides here on Earth exists, but it might, and we think that it should be out there somewhere, but we know that we haven't looked very far. We've looked at 0.001% of the universe, really a small sliver, hardly anything at all. The Fermi paradox is quite interesting, but we can't conclude that there's definitely life out there or that there's definitely no life out there. But we're thinking maybe there's life out there. We're going to look and see if we find any. We might never find it. And okay, well, we've looked, but at least in looking, we're not just looking for life, but we're looking and gathering data in general, so that data will be useful in some way, shape, or form. And we know that because data that we've gathered has been useful in some way, shape, or form in the past. So we don't necessarily know what the data will be used for, but we do know that the data is good to have. So looking at the world that we have and then saying, well, okay, I don't believe in God, which is not a fish. What is God? See, that's something he never covers in this video either. He just assumes that we know what God is. I don't. What do you mean by God? Oh, you're the one that comes up with God, not me. I don't believe in it. Why? Well, because I don't even know what it is. So how am I supposed to believe in it? Like I said, this could be God. How do I know? Maybe it is God. Like, this is really God, for real. That's what God is. And you might say, but no, that's not God. Well, how do you know? How do you know what God is in the first place? That's the question that must be addressed. Not if it's useful to believe in God or beneficial in some intangible way, but what God is, and more importantly, what methodology did you use to figure out that God was that in the first place? If that methodology is blind faith, then you don't know. If it is one based on evidence, data, valid and sound argument, then great, present me with that. But until you do, I don't believe in it. Because God is equivalent to blargle, blargle, blargle. What to believe is blargle, blargle, blargle. Well, that's the point. You don't know. So why would you believe in blargle, blargle, blargle unless you knew what blargle, blargle, blargle was? Well, it's certainly a word, but does it mean anything? Well, it means whatever I want it to mean. You don't know until I tell you. But how do you know that I'm being honest about blargle, blargle, blargle? Well, that's a difficult question to answer, isn't it? I could just be making up what blargle, blargle, blargle is. So we're still going to need to have evidence of blargle, blargle, blargle. It won't be enough that I just tell you what it is. I'm going to need to demonstrate what it is. And without any demonstration, what would you have? No evidence, no test, no valid and sound argument. So why would you believe blargle, blargle, blargle exists without such evidence? Because everybody told you that blargle, blargle, blargle was real when you were a kid, or maybe as an adult, and you just really thought that that was a cool idea to have. And you've spent a lot of time and energy on blargle, blargle, blargle. So, now you're going to doubt other things because it just makes you feel better to believe in blargle, 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 even though you don't have any evidence for it. But you can't say blargle, blargle, blargle isn't. Sure you can, because nobody's given any evidence that it is. So it's reasonable to conclude that I should believe in it. And in fact, I dare say it's reasonable to conclude that it isn't. More so if you start to add on to what blargle, blargle, blargle is by adding attributes that I should find in it. And when I observe reality, I don't find evidence of those attributes being active in the real world. So depending on what you say God is, it can be disproven. But if you're not going to tell us what God is, well, then I'm not going to believe in it, not even a little, because I can't, because you haven't defined it. But if you do define it, I would still have questions, of course. But, he's not going to do that in this video. So,
to draw a conclusion about a reality that is so vast that it makes your sliver of evidence look like a speck of dust. That's why both spiritual and atheistic worldviews are completely absurd conclusions to draw. The atheist looks at a lake.
So everybody's wrong. The spiritual says the lake is filled with angels. The non-atheist worldview, because it's not, says that the lake that everywhere is without fish because of one lake, and everybody's wrong. So we shouldn't believe in anything, which would still make me an atheist, by the way. Like, what he's saying is not analogous to atheism. You're looking at one pond and saying there's no fish there, therefore there's no fish anywhere. Well, I know what fish are, so that's not analogous to God. So that's a bad analogy. He's then saying the spiritual person looks at the pond and says there's angels there, which might indeed be what a spiritual person might say. But they definitely don't have evidence that angels are a thing in the first place. That's the problem. I have evidence that fish exists. I don't have any evidence of angels or what they are or how they work, not even a little. The person of faith is making an unwarranted extrapolation based on nothing, and the atheist in this scenario isn't an atheist. There's just a moron, which is what you are. But you also don't have a good argument for your side because you just want things to work out in your favor. Although you're now arguing against spirituality, which is really weird because I thought that that's what you wanted your conclusion to be. But now nobody is right, which is then an argument that we should be skeptical. You can't have it both ways, man.
Lake without fish and concludes that fish do not exist. The spiritualist looks at the same lake and concludes that angels exist. They are both equally misguided and ridiculous. So how do we determine our position? Simply accept the fact that we don't know? That's a good start, but let's...
Yeah, there you go. And that makes you a skeptic, not a believer. We don't know. Therefore, we shouldn't believe. So I don't know. I don't believe. That's it. But not just I don't know, but also there's good reason to believe or good reasons to know that I know the answer isn't X, Y, and Z, depending on what X, Y, and Z is. But he's not defining God, like I said. He's just dancing around the problem.
Let's go back to being stranded in the desert.
Oh,
if you choose
God.
to accept that you simply don't know if water can be found, you are still stuck with despair. Your hope is...
Okay, so an appeal to consequence, an appeal to emotion.
weakened. If you choose to be defiant and hope against hope that where there's a will, there's a way, that water will be found, you give yourself the best fighting chance.
No, not necessarily. You're extrapolating from your bad analogy on what will give you the best chance. I say the best chance that you have is based on knowledge of the world that you can accumulate, not based on pure ignorance, which is what you're suggesting. See, your scenario doesn't encompass reality. It only encompasses a tiny sliver of reality where you're saying, well, your hope that there will be water compels you to look for water. And I'm saying your hope is irrelevant. Either you'll find water or not, but you definitely won't find it if you don't look. Also, we know water exists. Where's the evidence of God? We don't know. You don't have it. So anyways.
It's strategically superior to choose to believe that you will find water. Some theorists think this may be why we evolved to believe in God. When our brains became advanced...
Which theorists believe that, by the way? He has no citations. So we're just going to have to accept that he knows that there are theorists that agree with him.
Enough to contemplate the nature of reality, we were faced with an existential question. Is this reality somehow benevolent and meaningful, or is it ruthless, uncaring, savage, and pointless?
Who cares? Whatever reality is what reality is. Whether I like the conclusion or not, it's irrelevant. But why does it have to be one or the other? That's called a false dichotomy. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's a little bit of good and a little bit of bad. Why can't that be the answer? Oh, because he doesn't like that answer.
Without making a claim about what the real answer is, some believe that from an evolutionary perspective, this is why we evolved to believe the former. Because
Who believes that? Some? Oh, okay, the some. I love that.
of its strategic advantage. Believing in a benevolent spiritual reality was comforting to our primitive existential questioning brain. And it
Sure, I agree. But I've evolved past that. I don't need it anymore.
encouraged us to be hopeful, optimistic, even kind, and to seek meaning and draw fulfillment from our participation in this mysterious yet benevolent reality.
And I've grown to not need that anymore. So, I don't need that to have hope. I don't need faith in anything to have hope or to want to keep existing. So, I mean, it doesn't apply to me anymore. Your appeal to emotion isn't going to work on me or anyone else. It shouldn't, but it might because people already believe in stuff. But
it may not be factually accurate, but some philosophers and evolutionary psychologists believe this is why natural selection promoted a spiritual worldview. You might
would love to know which scientists agreed with you, but you didn't list them in your site. You don't have any citations. So, I mean, you're just saying stuff is true, but I don't know if it is or isn't true. I doubt that it's true, but I'd love for you to prove that it's true with citation. No, he doesn't have any.
might say, well, that belief wasn't subject to the same processes of natural selection because we couldn't yet comprehend an atheistic worldview until we developed the scientific.
There is no such thing as an atheistic worldview. This is, again, with this, there is no atheistic worldview, okay? It's maddening. There's no, by the way, there's no theistic worldview either, because these words aren't enough to have a worldview on. There is no Republican or Democrat worldview either. They're not enough to do that. They're part of a worldview, but they are not in and of themselves a worldview. A worldview requires more than these words enable us to have. I wish people would just look up the damn word and go, oh, that's how it works. But this guy, I don't know, just people want to go, it's a worldview. It's not a worldview. I'm a theist. Okay, that's not a worldview. I'm an atheist. Also not a worldview. So, skeptic, also not a worldview either. Just part of one. And before you ask, I don't even know what my own worldview is per se. I tried to map it out once, but it was taking too long because there's too much damn stuff to cover. So I'll say that my worldview is essentially that I don't know what my worldview is, but I kind of know my epistemology, so at least that's something. Do you know what your epistemology is? If not, see a doctor. Wait.
Method. That's fine. But either way, it's clear that our brains initially evolved and adapted to operate with a spiritual worldview because that's what came first. I think this is why it's more comforting for the human psyche. Some theorists believe this is why spiritual belief is strongly correlated with a sense of meaning, purpose, community, and lower rates of depression and anxiety. The choice to defiantly believe in God, even if you see no angels descending from heaven, is strategically superior because it furnishes you with an illogical sense of optimism that empowers you to act as if a positive outcome is possible. This, in turn, enables you to uncover those positive outcomes and enjoy the psychological benefits of living in a benevolent reality. It might not be accurate, but it's what our brains evolved to believe, and that's
So the consequence of belief you think is positive, so you might as well believe because you'll feel better. It's an argument from and to emotion. No. It's not sufficient that even if it's the case that I'm hardwired to believe, I don't need it anymore. So I'm the counterexample to everything that you're saying. In fact, I would dare say all the people I know that are atheists also are the counterexample. They're perfectly happy without God. So you're wrong.
Why it feels better and makes us feel happier about reality. And at the end of the day, it is strategically superior. If you have faith that God will answer your prayers and offer you a path to overcome the challenges that you face, then you are far more likely to approach those challenges with the conviction needed to overcome them. It
Not necessarily.
might not be accurate to say that in order to achieve the impossible, all you need to do is believe, and more accurate to say that in order to achieve the unlikely, all you need to do is be optimistic and tenacious. In other words, if you believe that where there's a will, there's a way, that will give you the best chance of finding the way if there is indeed a way. Now, of course, if you're
On the other hand, if you have evidence, you don't need belief at all. If you have data, you don't need faith. When you have facts, the faith is irrelevant. I'd rather have facts than feelings about something. So be educated, not moronic.
stranded in the desert and choose to pray for water and lie there waiting for God to deliver water from heaven, that is not a strategically effective approach.
But if you believe hard enough, then God will give you the water. So you're saying sometimes belief doesn't give you a benefit? What the hell, man? You don't know what you're even arguing for anymore. Well, you never knew in the first place, maybe, but also your argument sucks. Also, it's not really an argument.
But that's a topic for another video. Faith isn't about truth. It's about strategy.
Well, that I agree with. Faith is definitely not about truth.
Evolution didn't shape us to believe in what's accurate. It shaped us to believe in what helps us survive.
So how do you account for atheists then? Are we a mutation?
That's why even if there is no God, it might still make sense to believe in one.
It doesn't make sense to believe in something without evidence. Even if it offers a benefit of some sort, well, you'd have to prove that benefit, but I can't just decide to believe in something because it's a benefit to do so. That's not how things work, man.
Belief in God is not about truth. Belief in God is
that I agree with.
A strategically adaptive mindset that improves survival odds, mental resilience, and innovation. In the meantime, I will choose to have faith in God, even if I lack the evidence, because this belief serves me better than the logical, skeptical alternative.
Wow. Well, there you go. He said it himself. It serves him better than the logical, skeptical alternative. So he doesn't care about reality. He just wants feelings. That's it. Okay. Well, I choose to exist in the real world. Now, like I've said, I don't know what God is until somebody tells me that God is X, Y, and Z. Then I go, okay, how do you know that God is those things? And then we can get into that discussion. But you didn't even bother to say what God is. So why is it beneficial to believe in God being X, Y, and Z in the first place? And by what method did you use to get to that conclusion? Because certainly you didn't do it here. He's got a little bit more to say. I want to make sure I cover it.
In other words, it's more logical to be illogical.
It's more logical to be illogical. No, it's not logical to be illogical because that fails due to the law of non-contradiction. But he's just admitted everything that I already complained about. Faith isn't about being true or right or real. It's all about feelings. I feel like it makes me happy, so I'm going to keep believing it because I'm happy. La-di-da. I don't believe in it, and I'm perfectly happy. Well, most of the time. you know, but my happiness or unhappiness is irrelevant to whether or not it's real. So basically, you just want to believe it's true because it makes you feel good. Man, Bog would love this video. It proves everything he's always said. It's just about feelings. We don't care about feelings. We care about fact. You don't have any. Your argument to and from analogy failed. Your appeals to emotion failed. Your more arguments to and from analogy failed. Your straw man of atheism failed. Your incorrect statement about worldview atheism failed. Your incoherentness fails. At every single conceivable level, you have failed to give a valid and or sound argument for your position. Not only that, but you failed on an essay style level as well, and you also failed completely because you presented no evidence, no data, no anything. You said that people agreed. You didn't show us that anybody actually agreed. You gave us no citations to follow through on any of those statements, so we don't need to believe those. Your conclusion is erroneous and not one we should accept on logic. But you said you don't care because you think it's illogical to accept logic. So you're literally lost and there's no way back for you until you accept that your belief is unreasonable and you should discard it. How does he possibly explain the fact that many, many, many atheists have hope without the sort of faith that he has? I don't believe in God, yet I do have hope. I do believe in people. I believe that they can be good people. Now, I don't know that I'm right about that, and I find out that I'm wrong a lot. But I believe that we can be good. Only we have to want to do that. So I do have some beliefs. But I know that beliefs can be dangerous. And so I question what I believe all the time. And that's something that you need to learn how to do. Whatever the belief. What is his name again? Nacromancer? Whatever. I don't know. So we don't have evidence. We don't have a repeatable list. We didn't have a sound argument. So we have to be skeptical of his conclusions. No big surprise there. All right, whatever. Let's see. Yeah, I gotta agree. God belief is illogical. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree with that part. That's about the only thing I agreed with. So, anyways, that's all we've got for today. And I knocked over my speaker. This is not a speaker. This is a microphone. Why did I say speaker when I knocked it over, though? I was like, I knocked over my speaker. I don't know. Anyways, next time you find yourself lost in the desert, don't believe, but know that you can maybe find water. But before you just know that, also maybe learn how to, you know what? I'm going to learn how to find water in the desert. How to find water in the desert. I'm going to look up how to do that and learn all about that, just in case I ever find myself lost in the desert. Because knowledge is power. All right. See you all next time. Be skeptical, everybody. And then after skeptical, stay skeptical, because otherwise you might believe that this is God. Oh, that's on my head. I named him God, but that doesn't make him God, but he is God. So I don't know how that works. Let me know in the comments below. All right.